The stranger with oil on his hands. Late afternoon sun dipped low behind the hills of a small desert town called Ridgepoint. It was a place people usually drove through, not to. Dry winds scraped along cracked roads, and time moved slowly like an old song on a worn-out record. The kind of place where everyone knew your name, or at least your truck. It was here, just off Route 68, that an old man named Walter kept his garage. It wasn't fancy just for rusted walls, a sign with peeling letters that said Walters Auto, and a phone that didn't ring much anymore. But it was enough. Walter was 73, stiff in the knees and tired in the bones, but he still opened the shop each morning at 7 sharp, not because he had to, because it was the last thing that gave him purpose. His wife had passed 2 years ago. His daughter hadn't called in months, and most of the newer folks drove to the bigger town 20 miles east, where they had modern equipment and young mechanics who didn't smell like oil and cigarettes. On this particular Thursday, Walter was under the hood of a dusty Ford when he heard the soft growl of an engine outside. Not loud, just steady, like a voice trying to ask for help without saying a word. He stood up slowly, wiping his hands on an old rag, and squinted toward the road. A black motorcycle was pulling into his gravel driveway. It was a vintage model, well-loved, but clearly in trouble. Steam puffed gently from the engine. The rider was tall, wore a simple gray hoodie, jeans, and a full-face helmet. No logos, no flash, just a man and his bike. Walter shuffled forward. "Trouble?" he asked, his voice like dry gravel. The man removed his helmet, and for a brief second, Walter froze, because standing there, sweaty and humble, was Keanu Reeves. But Walter didn't know that. He saw a tired traveler with kind eyes and a quiet way about him. "Yeah," the man said, brushing his hair back. "She started overheating a few miles back. Thought I'd stop before it got worse." Walter nodded. "You did the right thing," he replied. "Bring her in. Let's take a look." Keanu pushed the bike gently toward the shade. He didn't offer his name, and Walter didn't ask. Inside the garage, the smell of oil, grease, and old memories filled the air. Walter bent over the engine, muttering to himself as he poked around. Keanu watched, respectful and curious. "You've had this one a while," Walter said, nodding at the bike. "Yeah," Keanu smiled. "She's been with me through a lot." "Funny how machines stick with you longer than people," Walter murmured, half to himself. Keanu didn't answer. He just watched the old man work. There was a quiet dignity in the way Walter moved, slow but steady, like someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. "In our past." Then another. Walter handed Keanu a bottle of water. "Not much left in the fridge," he said, "but it's cold." Keanu took it gratefully. "Thank you." Walter glanced at him. Something about the man felt familiar. Not in the face exactly, more in the energy. "You look like someone I seen on TV," Walter said, chuckling. Keanu grinned. "I get that sometimes." Walter laughed. "Must be the beard." They both smiled, and for a moment, it felt like they'd known each other for years. Outside, the sky turned orange, and a breeze picked up. "She'll run fine now," Walter said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Had a leak in the coolant line. Patched it. Won't last forever, but it'll get you to the next town." Keanu reached into his pocket. Walter held up a hand. "No charge." Keanu blinked. "What? You're just passing through, and you're polite. That's enough." Keanu looked at him, something shifting behind his eyes. No one had refused his money in years. Not because they recognized him, but because people didn't do that anymore. Everyone wanted something. But not Walter. "I insist," Keanu said, offering a few folded bills. Walter gently pushed his hand away. "Tell you what," he said, smiling. "Next time you're round, bring me a cup of real coffee. That'll make us even." Keanu nodded, deeply moved. He reached out and shook Walter's hand. "Deal." As he strapped his helmet back on and revved the bike, Walter stood at the edge of the garage, watching the stranger ride off into the desert light. He didn't know he'd just helped one of the most beloved actors in the world. But soon, he would. And when that moment came, everything in Walter's life would change. Not because of fame, but because kindness given with no expectation always finds a way back home. Asterisk the man who kept his word. Walter opened his garage the next morning like always. The old rusted gate groaned as it lifted, the familiar creak of routine comforting his worn-out heart. Nothing felt different, not the desert air, not the silence of his phone, and not the small fridge humming in the corner with exactly 2 bottles of water left. He poured himself a cup of weak coffee, sat on the bench near the back wall, and looked out toward the empty road. He didn't expect the man from yesterday to return. He never expected much anymore. But his mind kept drifting to that traveler with kind eyes. There was something about him, something that stuck. Walter pushed the thought away and got back to work. The radiator on old Harry's truck was leaking again, and he didn't have time to sit around thinking about strangers with smooth voices and quiet smiles. But elsewhere, far from Ridgepoint, KeanuReeves hadn't forgotten either. Keanu sat in his hotel room in Los Angeles, staring at the cracked screen of his phone. He hadn't said a word to anyone about the old man who'd helped him. Not to his assistant, not to his manager, not to the media. But it had done something to him. The simplicity, the honesty, the way Walter had refused his money. It reminded him of his own father and of all the people who had come and gone in his life, most of them chasing fame, money, or recognition. Walter had none of that. And still, he gave. Keanu stood up and opened his suitcase. Tucked inside was a worn leather notebook he carried with him on every shoot. He opened it and scribbled 3 words, "Bring coffee back," then underlined it twice. 1 week later, Walter was under the hood of another car when he heard it. The soft growl of a motorcycle. He didn't even look up at first. Leave it in neutral and push her in, he called out, his hands deep in the engine. But the bike didn't move. Instead, he heard footsteps. Slow, steady. "You owe me a cup of coffee," came a voice. Walter turned, and there he was again. The same gray hoodie, the same gentle eyes, but this time, holding 2 cups of fresh hot coffee and a paper bag with the logo of a fancy bakery from Los Angeles. Walter blinked. "You came back." Keanu smiled. "I keep my promises." They sat on the bench outside the garage drinking coffee as the sun climbed higher. Walter took a bite of the croissant Keanu handed him and chuckled. "Never had one of these before. It's from a place my mom used to love," Keanu said quietly. "Figured you deserved something more than gas station muffins." Walter took another bite. "Not bad. Buttery." Keanu nodded, then fell silent. Walter looked at him sideways. "You're not just passing through again, are you?" Keanu shook his head. "No, this time I came just for you." Walter raised a brow. "Why would a man like you drive all the way here just to see a dusty old mechanic?" Keanu turned to him. "Because people like you don't show up in my life often, and when they do, I want to honor it." Walter stared at him. For a moment, something stirred in his chest. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to him with that kind of respect. Not as a charity case, not as a burden, but as someone who mattered. Keanu pulled out a small black box from his backpack. "This is for you." Walter opened it slowly. Inside was a silver wrench, polished, engraved with his name. Beneath it, a small card that read, "To the man who fixes more than engines. Thank you for reminding me what kindness looks like." Walter's throat tightened. He closed the box gently and placed it on the bench beside him. "I'm just a mechanic," he whispered. Keanu looked at him. "And I'm just an actor. But that day, you were more than a mechanic. You were the reason I believed in people again." They sat in silence for a long time. After that, a few cars passed on the road. A bird landed on the garage roof and flew away. Nothing big happened. But for Walter, the world had quietly shifted. Later that evening, after Keanu had left again, Walter locked up his garage and went back inside his small house behind the shop. He placed the box with the silver wrench on the shelf above the fireplace. Then he picked up the phone. For the first time in a long time, he dialed his daughter. It rang once. Twice. "Hello," came her voice. Walter smiled. "Hey, sweetheart. It's Dad. I wanted to hear your voice." There was a pause on the line. Then her voice softened. "Hi, Dad, I missed you." But Ridgepoint wasn't done with surprises yet, because 3 days later, a black van pulled up outside Walter's Garage. Two men in suits stepped out, and what they told Walter next would leave him speechless. The visitor from the city, Walter, had just finished tightening the bolts on a pickup's exhaust. When the black van pulled into his driveway, the vehicle looked out of place, sleek, polished, with tinted windows that reflected the dusty sky. It didn't belong in Ridgepoint, and it certainly didn't belong outside a half-rusted garage run by a 73-year-old mechanic. Walter wiped his hands on a cloth and stepped out from the shadows of his workshop, squinting under the harsh afternoon light. The van door opened slowly. Two men stepped out. They were wearing dark suits and sunglasses, their expressions unreadable. Walter's single quotes as heart tightened a little. He hadn't done anything wrong, but he'd lived long enough to know that people in suits rarely brought good news. You Walter Thompson? One of the men asked. Walter nodded cautiously. Yeah, that's me. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a slim envelope. It was cream-colored, sealed with a small golden stamp in the shape of a circle. He held it out. This is for you. Personal delivery from Mr. Reeves. Walter frowned as he took the envelope. The paper felt heavier than usual. He looked up at the men, but they had already turned to leave. Wait, Walter said. What is this? The taller man smiled faintly. You'll see. And with that, they climbed back into the van and drove off, disappearing into the highway dust like a secret never meant to be shared. Walter stood there, motionless, the envelope in his hands. For a moment, he didn't move. He just stared. Then, slowly, he walked back into the garage and sat down on the old bench near the back wall. His fingers trembled slightly as he peeled the seal open. Inside was a single piece of thick parchment. The words were typed neatly, and at the bottom was a handwritten signature. Dear Walter, I hope this letter finds you well. When you helped me that day, you didn't know who I was. And that's exactly why it meant so much. You treated me with dignity, without expectation. You reminded me of what my father used to tell me, that real kindness asks for nothing in return. I've been thinking about how to thank you properly, not with fame, not with money, but with something that might matter more. So, I made a few calls. Please read the enclosed papers carefully. They are real, and they are just the beginning. With deep respect, Keanu Reeves. Walter stared at the letter for a long time. Then he reached back into the envelope and pulled out another document. It was stapled, official-looking, with a shiny watermark in the corner. His eyes widened. It was a full renovation proposal completely funded for his garage. Not just repairs. It detailed new equipment, a new sign, a modern workspace, a small waiting lounge for customers, and even a climate-controlled area so he could continue working during the harsh summers. At the bottom was an approval stamp from a charity group linked to Keanu's private foundation. Walter's single quotes s chest tightened. He couldn't speak. He couldn't even breathe properly. His entire body shook, not from fear but from disbelief. He stood up slowly, gripping the paper like it might disappear if he blinked. Over the next few weeks, Ridgepoint buzzed with energy it hadn't felt in years. Construction vans rolled in. Workers replaced the corroded pipes under Walter's garage. A new lift was installed. Shelves were refitted. Windows were cleaned and replaced. And the old faded sign that once read Walter's Auto was taken down gently, sanded, and hung next to a brand new one that said, Walter's Honest Hands, Estate, 1980. For underneath it, in smaller letters, sponsored by Reeves Foundation. People came from nearby towns to see what was happening. Word spread fast. At first, Walter didn't know how to handle the attention. He wasn't used to being noticed. But slowly, something in him began to change. He stood a little straighter, smiled a little more, and began to believe that maybe, just maybe, his best days weren't behind him. Keanu didn't return right away. He didn't need to. His gift had already made its mark. But one morning, as Walter stood sipping coffee outside his fully restored garage, a small boy approached him with wide eyes. Are you really the man who helped Keanu Reeves? The boy asked. Walter chuckled. I didn't know it was him, he said. Just thought he was a tired guy on a bike. The boy looked around at the shiny new garage. My dad says you must be a hero. Walter's eyes softened. Nah, he said gently. I just gave someone a hand. That's what we're supposed to do. Later that day, Walter went through the mail. Among the usual bills and flyers, there was a smaller envelope. No return address. He opened it slowly. Inside was a photo taken without his knowledge. It was him, under the hood, working on Keanu's motorcycle. Next to the photo was a simple note. Every story needs a beginning. This one started with your hands. Beneath the note was a signature. Keanu. Walter stared at the photo, his eyes stinging. He looked around the garage's garage, and then he looked at his hands, still worn, still calloused. But now, seen. Respected. And remembered. But there was one more surprise waiting for him, one that would test his heart even more than the others, because just as he was locking up that evening, a woman appeared at the edge of the driveway. Walter froze. He hadn't seen her in over a year, his daughter, and standing next to her was a little girl holding a stuffed bear. Walter dropped his keys. His voice cracked. Maddie? His daughter smiled, eyes filled with tears. We came home, Dad. The homecoming. Walter stood still like a statue, as if the world had suddenly stopped moving. The old keys he dropped bounced once on the concrete, then rolled quietly toward the edge of the garage. He didn't bend to pick them up. He didn't even move. He just stared at the two figures standing in the fading sunlight, his daughter, and a little girl he had never met, not in person anyway. Maddie, he whispered again, as if afraid she might disappear. His daughter stepped forward, her eyes soft and unsure. Her voice trembled, but her smile held. Hi, Dad, she said gently. Walter blinked fast, trying to swallow the lump rising in his throat. I didn't think you'd. I know, she said quickly. I didn't either, not for a long time. The little girl clutched her mother's hand and looked up at Walter with curious eyes. She wore pink shoes and had a tiny red bow in her hair. In her other hand, she held an old teddy bear, one eye missing. Walter knelt down slowly, his knees cracking as he did. And who might you be, young lady? He asked. The girl giggled. Mama says your grandpa. Walter's heart cracked. Right down the center. She did she? The girl nodded. Are you the man who fixes bikes and hearts? Walter smiled, wide and broken all at once. Maybe I am, sweetheart, maybe I am. They didn't talk about the past that night. Walter made them grilled cheese sandwiches in the small kitchen behind the garage, and Maddie found the old photo of her mother still on the fridge. Her eyes welled up, but she didn't say anything. Her daughter, Lily, fell asleep on the couch with crumbs on her shirt and her arms wrapped around the teddy bear. After dinner, Walter and Maddie sat outside beneath a sky full of stars. The wind was gentle, the dessert cool. You really helped him, Maddie asked quietly. Walter shrugged. Didn't know who he was, just saw a man in trouble. He gave you all this, she said, waving her hand at the new garage, the signs, the lights. You didn't even ask. He gave me something bigger, Walter said, eyes fixed on the sky. He gave me you. Maddie looked down, ashamed. I'm sorry, Dad. Walter turned to her. No, I'm sorry, he said, for holding on to the past longer than I should have. We both hurt. We both lost her, and I didn't know how to be anything after that. Maddie's voice broke. I didn't know either. Walter reached over and held her hand. For the first time in years, neither of them pulled away. The next morning, Lily ran barefoot through the garage, her laughter echoing against the metal walls. She found a screwdriver and pretended it was a magic wand. Walter chuckled and gently took it from her before she could poke herself in the eye. That's not for princesses, he said, but I might have a tiara made out of wrenches somewhere. She clapped. Yes, please. Walter looked at Maddie. She's got your energy. She's got your stubbornness, Maddie replied with a grin. Poor kid, Walter muttered, laughing. They stayed for 3 days. 3 days that felt like a lifetime. Walter taught Lily how to check tire pressure. Maddie helped clean out the old backroom, tossing out boxes Walter hadn't touched in years. Inside one of them, she found a faded letter she'd written him as a teenager. She read it silently and then folded it back into her pocket. On the third day, as they were packing up to leave, a small gray car pulled into the driveway. Walter stepped outside and recognized the man behind the wheel immediately. It was Frank Mills, the mayor of Ridgepoint. Frank got out, his shirt slightly wrinkled, clipboard in hand. "Walter," he said. "You got a minute?" Walter nodded slowly. "Sure." Frank scratched the back of his neck. "Word's been spreading. About your shop. About Keanu Reeves. We've had reporters calling the town hall. Some news outlets too." Walter winced. "I didn't want all that." "I know you didn't," Frank said kindly. "But it's here. And the town council thinks it might be a good idea to use it. Spotlight the town. Maybe bring in a few tourists, some business." Walter frowned. "I don't want to turn it into a circus." Frank nodded. "Then don't. But maybe use it for something good. Something more." Walter looked down at his hands. They had built this life. Quietly, honestly. Maybe it was time to let the world see what kindness could do. 2 weeks later, Ridgepoint held its first community open garage day. People came from miles away, not to see a movie star, but to meet the mechanic who didn't ask for anything and ended up with everything that mattered. Walter stood in the center of the garage, now painted a warm yellow, with rows of kids learning how to check oil and patch tires. Lily ran around, with a tool belt too big for her waist. Maddie handed out lemonade in paper cups. And outside the shop, a small metal bench was installed with a plaque that read, "For those who fix what's broken." Without needing to be asked, Walter sat there just after sunset, looking at the crowd, the laughter, the light. And then, one last surprise rolled in. The black motorcycle, the same one from all those weeks ago. Keanu stepped off slowly, helmet in hand. This time, Walter didn't act surprised. He simply stood up and opened his arms. "Welcome back, son." Keanu hugged him, and the crowd burst into soft applause. But it wasn't for a celebrity. It was for a friend. And as they stood together, side by side, Walter leaned in and whispered, This is what you fixed, Keanu. Not the shop, not the tools, but my family, my heart." Keanu nodded, emotion shining in his eyes. "Then it was the best repair job of my life." The secret Keanu kept at night. After the open garage event ended and most of the visitors had gone, Ridgepoint fell quiet again. A few kids lingered outside the bakery across the road, and some neighbors waved as they passed, still buzzing from the day's warmth. The stars blinked softly in the sky, the desert air cool and calm. Walter sat on the bench outside his garage, shoulders slightly hunched but heart full. Lily was fast asleep in the small house behind the garage. Maddie was folding blankets from the event, and Keanu Reeves, he was still there, sipping from a cup of coffee Walter had brewed himself. It was strong, maybe too strong, but Keanu drank it with a smile. Walter looked over at him. "You didn't have to come back, What you did, it was already more than enough." Keanu stared out at the road, silent for a moment. "I didn't come back because I owed you," he said quietly. "I came back because I needed to." Walter raised a brow. "Needed?" Keanu nodded. "There's something I never told you, something I haven't told anyone." Walter leaned forward, his face lined with curiosity. "You remember the first time I came here?" Keanu asked. "Sure do," Walter replied. "Your bike was hissing steam like an old kettle." Keanu chuckled, then took a deep breath. "I wasn't just riding through that day. I was running away." Walter's smile faded. "From what?" Keanu looked down at his hands, then back at the garage walls. "From a deal, from pressure, from life." He paused, choosing his words. "That week, I was supposed to sign a massive project, a film with a huge budget, but it didn't feel right. The people behind it, the way they treated the crew, the young actors. It was wrong, cold, and when I spoke up, they told me to just act and smile." Walter frowned. "They forgot you were a human being." Keanu nodded slowly. "I hopped on my bike and told no one. No GPS, no plan, just followed the road. And somehow, I ended up in Ridgepoint." Walter whistled softly. Keanu smiled. "And then you patched my bike, offered me water, refused my money. You reminded me who I really was," he said, voice quieter now. "Just a man, not a brand, not a product, just a man." Walter looked down, heart heavier now with the weight of what he hadn't known. "So I saved more than your radiator, huh?" Keanu laughed gently. "You saved something bigger. My direction. maybe even my soul." Walter didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he leaned back and whispered, "Well then, no charge." They both laughed, soft and full of understanding. The next morning, Keanu asked if he could stay another day. Walter said yes without thinking. And that day, they worked side by side in the garage. Walter handed him tools. Keanu wiped grease from his face like he'd done it 100 times before. They fixed 2 flat tires, changed 3 oil filters, and showed Lily how to safely hold a wrench. She was delighted. Maddie took a picture of the 3 of them, standing beside a dusty old truck with matching smudges of oil on their cheeks. "Look at you two," she said, laughing, "a mechanic and a movie star." Walter waved her off. "We're both just men with tired knees." Keanu nodded, "and full hearts." But that evening, just as the sun began to set again, Keanu grew quiet. They were back on the bench. The coffee was cold this time, but neither seemed to mind. "I need to tell you one more thing," Keanu said, staring into the fading orange light. Walter turned toward him. "I bought the land." Walter blinked. "What land?" "The empty plot behind the garage," Keanu said, "and the one across the road. The whole corner block, actually." Walter's mouth opened slightly. "Why?" Keanu took a deep breath. "Because I want to build something here. Something real. A school." Walter leaned back, shocked. "A school? Here, a trade school," Keanu said, "for kids who don't fit in the usual system. Mechanics, carpenters, artists, kids who are told they won't make it. I want to give them a space to learn something honest." Walter stared at him, stunned. "And I want to name it after you." Walter shook his head slowly. "No. Keanu, you don't need to do that. I know." "I don't," Keanu said softly. "But I want to. Because the world needs more men like you." Walter closed his eyes for a moment, overwhelmed. "What would you even call a place like that?" Keanu looked at him with a half-smile. "The Walter Thompson School of Honest Hands." Walter laughed through his tears. "That's a mouthful." "Good names are," Keanu replied. The next day, Keanu left. But this time, he didn't ride away quietly. He walked through town with Walter and Lily. Shook hands with the mayor, met the local teacher, and took a photo with everyone who asked. Not as a celebrity. As a man. A friend. A builder of something that would outlast him. And months later, as bulldozers cleared the empty lot behind Walter's garage, a new sign was nailed into the ground. A small group gathered to watch. Maddie stood beside her father. Lily clapped with joy. And Walter? He just stared at the words on the board. "Coming soon. Walter Thompson School of Honest Hands. Founded by Keanu Reeves. Built with love." He whispered to himself, almost in disbelief. "All I did was fix a bike. And yet, somehow, it had changed everything." Hands that built hope. Construction on the Walter Thompson School of Honest Hands began in early spring. Ridgepoint, once a quiet pit stop barely marked on maps, had become something else, something alive. Every morning, trucks arrived carrying wood, steel, and brick. Every evening, locals gathered at the edges of the lot, watching walls rise and dreams take shape. It wasn't just the building, it was what it stood for: honesty, effort, kindness without expectation. Walter came to the site every day, even if no one asked him to. He brought coffee for the crew, fixed tools that broke, and taught one of the younger workers how to spot when a drill bit was about to snap. He didn't speak much about Keanu Reeves anymore. Not because he'd forgotten, because he didn't need to explain. The town knew. They all knew. One small act had started all of this. Keanu returned just once more before the ribbon cutting. He arrived in a plain pickup, not a motorcycle this time, and walked through the nearly finished school with Walter and Lily by his side. The floors smelled of fresh paint. The classrooms had tool racks, workbenches, and chalkboards. Not smartboards, chalkboards. "We're teaching them how to build," Keanu said, his voice echoing in the hallway. "Not just things, but themselves." Walter nodded. "Then you built the right place." At the end of the tour, they stopped in the main hall. Above the front entrance, in bold, clean letters, the words were carved into the wood: "Built by hands, guided by heart." Walter stared at the words. "You wrote that?" Keanu smiled. "No, Lily did." Walter turned to his granddaughter who giggled proudly. Mama helped me spell guided. Walter knelt and hugged her tight. You did good. Peanut. Opening day arrived in late June. The entire town gathered. Reporters came. News crews rolled in. But nobody was the center of attention. Not even Keanu. Instead, the spotlight was shared between students, teachers, parents, and an old man in grease-stained jeans and a freshly ironed shirt. When it was time to speak, Walter stood at the microphone. Not many had ever seen him speak publicly. His hands shook, his voice trembled, but his words came slow, real, and from the core. I never thought I'd see something like this. He began, not with my name on it, not in a place like this. All I ever did was fix cars, and for most of my life, that was enough. I didn't ask for thanks, didn't want a spotlight. He paused, but one day, a stranger rode in on a bike with a broken engine. I didn't know his name, didn't care. I helped him cause that's what we do here. That's what my dad taught me. He looked at the crowd, and that stranger, he didn't just fix my roof. He didn't just send tools and workers. He brought back something I thought I lost. He looked toward Maddie and Lily, standing in the front row. He brought back my family. The crowd was quiet. Walter stepped down, wiping a tear with the back of his hand. Keanu walked up next. But he didn't speak from the stage. He simply stood beside Walter, took the mic, and said one thing. This is Walter's story. I just rode into it. The audience stood. Not to clap for a celebrity, but to honor a man who once thought he was forgotten and found himself at the center of a movement. The school opened its doors with 40 students. Some dropped out of traditional classrooms. Some came from homes with more pain than peace. Some had never been told they were good at anything. But at the Walter Thompson School, they learned with their hands and slowly, with their hearts. Walter became a mentor. He fixed more than engines. He fixed self-worth. One day, a boy named Jeremy stayed after class. He couldn't read well, but he could rebuild a carburetor in under an hour. Walter sat beside him and said, that mind of yours ain't broken, just wired different, and different is gold here. Jeremy didn't stop smiling for weeks. Months passed, then a year. The school grew. More students, more tools, more stories. Maddie started teaching basic budgeting for mechanics, how to run an honest business. Lily, now taller, proudly said her grandpa had a school named after him every time someone asked. And Walter aged, but his eyes never dimmed again. His hands still trembled, but now they trembled while handing over diplomas, shaking the hands of kids who once doubted themselves, and helping place their names on toolboxes they could call their own. On the second anniversary of the school, the mayor held a special event. Walter, now walking slower, sat in the front row with a cane resting beside him. Keanu Reeves couldn't make it. He was overseas filming. But a letter arrived, written by hand, read aloud to the entire audience. Dear Ridgepoint, I may be far away today, but my heart is right there with all of you. Walter once gave me help without asking who I was. Now hundreds of young people know exactly who he is, a symbol of honesty, humility, and hope. This school isn't just brick and tools, it's proof that kindness can change everything. Keep building, keep believing. With love, Keanu. When the letter ended, Walter stood with help. He raised a hand to the crowd. And everyone, students, teachers, townspeople, stood with him. Because in a world that often forgets quiet heroes, Walter Thompson had become something timeless. A reminder that even the smallest kindness can echo for generations.